Thank you all for joining us today for this co-hosted event by Raksha and the South Asian Bar Association of Georgia. My name is Lalitha Aladi, and I will be the moderator for the evening. But I'd like to start by inviting Aparna to speak today on behalf of Raksha, since she's our co-host. Aparna?
Thank you so much, Lalitha. What a dream come true for the Raksha staff to be able to have a legal clinic with the South Asian Bar Association of Georgia. Y'all have been an amazing partner, and we're so grateful to be doing this together and hope this is the start of an even stronger partnership. And for those of you who don't know, Raksha, which means protection in many of our languages, has been around 27 years, and our mission is to promote a stronger and healthier South Asian community. We do that through confidential support services, education, and advocacy, and our end goal is to work towards healing, empowerment, and justice for South Asian survivors.
Thank you, Aparna. And I would like to speak on behalf of the South Asian Bar Association of Georgia. I'm the president this year, and our organization likes to put on events where we can assist the community. And this year we felt that we could definitely partner with Raksha. There's a need on several subjects that we could address. This first event that we're having is about immigration, but we are planning one or two other events in the future. So please do join us if you believe that other areas of law are something that you could benefit from. First of all, before I introduce our panelists for the evening, just want to let everybody know that nothing that we're providing today is legal advice. You should not consider it as legal advice. Instead, you should go ahead and seek further counsel for your specific situation. But you may definitely use what we talk about today as guidance, so you have a rough idea of which direction to head, and then you can seek counsel. Secondly, while we proceed, if you have any questions but don't want your name to appear, you can see if there's an anonymous feature, or you can write to me directly, and I will be happy to field those questions to our panelists. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our amazing panelists for the evening. First, we have with us Nisha Karnani. She is a partner from Antonini Cohen Immigration Law Group, which is a mid-sized boutique immigration law firm located here in Atlanta, Georgia. She practiced immigration exclusively since being admitted to the bar in 2001. Ms. Karnani currently serves as the honorary legal advisor to the Indian Consul General in Atlanta. She's also a trustee on the SABA North America Foundation. And Ms. Karnani serves on the advisory board of Raksha to help other South Asian, the rest of the South Asian community. She is a founding member of the South Asian Bar Association of Georgia, and she has received the Raksha Seeds of Change Award for her advocacy and pro bono efforts on behalf of H4 survivors of domestic violence. Ms. Karnani is also recipient of the Justice Robert Benham Award for Community Service. We also have with us Jameel Manji. He is not only very passionate about immigration, it's also because he has a very personal connection. His parents are refugees that fled Uganda in the 1970s and immigrated to Canada, where Jameel was born. Jameel's practice focuses on family immigration, deportation defense, and criminal defense for non-citizens. Jameel grew up in Marietta and currently lives in Kirkwood with his partner and their dog. And last but not least, we have Alpa Amin with us today. She's the executive director of Georgia Asylum and Immigration Network, also known as GAIN. Having previously served as GAIN's director of legal services, Alpa began her work with GAIN in 2008 as a law and policy assistant. And in 2009, with the support from Greenberg Traurig and King and Spalding, she was awarded an Equal Justice Works Fellowship to establish GAIN's Victim of Violence program. In her current role, Alpa oversees all aspects of GAIN's work, including the provision of pro bono legal services. She works closely with federal, state, and local law enforcement and is a frequent guest on issues affecting vulnerable immigrant communities. Alpa is also a past chair of the Georgia Immigration Collaborative and Georgia Statewide Human Trafficking Task Force. She's also a graduate of the FBI Citizens Academy, Leadership Buckhead, and Anti-Defamation League's Glass Leadership Institute. More recently, she's been recognized as one of the top 25 most influential Asian Americans in Georgia. And also, you should know that she is a graduate of Virginia Tech University and Atlanta's John Marshall Law School. So everyone help me welcome our guests and panelists for the evening. The format that we're going to proceed with today is first to start with some topics that we believe will benefit many of our viewers today. So we will talk to the panelists about that, and then we will open it up to questions from our audience. So first of all, I would like to talk about common solutions for survivors. So if we could first start by just listing the solutions, and then maybe we'll go down and break them up one by one. Maybe Alpa, do you think you could talk to me a little bit about common solutions for survivors?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. It's such an honor to be here with you all and with my fellow panelists. When we're talking about remedies, immigration remedies for survivors, I'd like to kind of back up a little bit and say that the immigration status that is afforded to someone is really kind of a gateway. It's the very thing that allows them to remain safe and stable in this country. It opens up their ability to get a driver's license, a work permit, open up a bank account. And so it's very important that somebody who is escaping abuse or trafficking have access to a way to stay here safely in the U.S., but also have access to all of the benefits that I just mentioned. And so, generally speaking, at GAIN, we specialize in this work, this humanitarian relief for survivors. And what we help people with are specifically the VAWA self-petition, which we will talk a little bit more about today, the I-751 battered spouse waiver, the U visa, T visa, and occasionally we help with H-4 applications as well.
Definitely sounds like there are multiple options depending on the scenario for that individual. So before I move over to the other panelists, would you be able to talk to us about some of the steps of filing for VAWA?
Absolutely. So what differentiates the VAWA application from some of the other forms of relief is who the perpetrator is. In a VAWA self-petition case, the abuser is going to be a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident. It can be a spouse or an adult child. And typically what we work on at GAIN is VAWA cases that involve abuse that happened in a domestic setting, so between partners. For a VAWA self-petition, it is designed to be kind of the first step towards obtaining a green card. And the reason why it's called a self-petition is it's allowing someone to petition for their own immigration relief so that they do not have to depend on the abusive spouse for help in that process. To obtain a VAWA self-petition, you've got to file an I-360 application, provide supporting evidence, and meet certain requirements. That includes, of course, the status of the abuser needs to be a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident. There has to be a lawful relationship, a relationship with that abuser. A good faith marriage in the case of spouses, where you have to show that at the time that you married, that you intended to be married and that you weren't trying to evade immigration laws. There's a residence requirement, so you have to be here in the United States. There's some limited exceptions to that, and prove that you have resided with your abuser at some point throughout the marriage. In addition to that, there's of course a good moral character requirement and the battery or extreme cruelty, and that's it sounds fairly easy to establish, but in certain cases where there is no documentation, there is no protective order or police report, it becomes very important for the victim's story to be documented well in order to establish qualification for that.
Very good. Thank you so much. Now, Jameel, I know that you also frequently handle U1 visas. How does the U1 visa differ from filing a VAWA petition?
Sure. So the U visa, which is a very hot topic these days, it's for victims of certain types of crimes. So
Mhm.
you have to show that you've been working with law enforcement, that you've been helping them to try to prosecute the case. So first you have to be a member, you have to first be a victim of a crime, and it has to be a specific crime that qualifies. Then you have to work with law enforcement to try to help them, and law enforcement has to certify your case. So that's part of the main problem first. You have to make sure that law enforcement wants to help you. Once you go from there, if you can get the certification, then you can file for the U visa. There's crazy backlogs right now, but the good news is now you can get work permits that allow you to work and see if you have a bona fide determination, which will then allow you to, wait and see if you are processed for that U visa. If you do get that U visa after a number of years, then you can become a permanent resident.
Okay. And Nisha, I know that you, of course, as we said in the introduction, you have worked heavily with Raksha. So, would you be able to tell us, with respect to U visas and VAWA, how might someone receive help if they came to Raksha for such assistance?
Yes, and thank you everybody for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here. My two favorite organizations are Raksha and the South Asian Bar Association, so I'm very excited to be here. A lot of the clients that I work with are sometimes referred to me through Raksha and sometimes through other means, but a lot of times when you are a survivor and you're an immigrant, you're dealing with so many different systems and barriers and challenges. And so what Raksha can provide are what us lawyers can't do, which we can't be counselors. We sometimes, can't advise people on benefits and getting shelter and all those other things that you need to do, the multiple needs that you have when you're a survivor. I think, Lalitha, you wanted me to talk about the 765B, is that right? So many, I would say 80 to 90% of the clients that we help in the South Asian community, they are H-4 visa holders. It's a dependent spouse visa for the H-1B professional work visa. And for those who are born in India, the employment-based green card process takes so long. It takes over 10 years that the VAWA petitions that Alpa was talking about, they're not eligible for because the perpetrator is not yet a permanent resident. So they can't access that protection. And so there's a tool called an I-765B, which is a special work permit and protection for H-4 survivors. And it's actually for other dependent spouses as well. But for our community, mostly it's H-4 survivors that will use it. And essentially, you have to show that you were last admitted or last came to the U.S. in H-4 status, that you were abused. But abuse does not only mean physical abuse. It can also include emotional abuse, psychological abuse. It can include sexual abuse. And many times the clients I work with don't even classify what they're going through as abuse sometimes. So we have to talk through it. But you demonstrate that. And that you demonstrate that you're in the United States. The nice thing about this application is that if you don't have access to your own documents or your spouse's documents, immigration will verify that for you. So you just have to let them know. And it takes about, right now, 5 to 7 months to process, but you get a work permit. And that's valid for 2 years. And it's a really good Band-Aid solution for what Jameel was talking about with the U visa, what Alpa was mentioning with the VAWA relief. And it's really helped so many folks in our community. It's not perfect. There's some challenges with it. For example, if you get divorced, then you can only file for this relief within 2 years. So you have to basically file your extensions before your 2-year anniversary of a divorce. So a divorce basically can shorten the amount of time you can have a 765B, but it's a good Band-Aid solution. And I will just mention that a lot of my clients that I've helped with it, it's been really wonderful because it removes a lot of the financial barriers to getting safety and healing, because you can many folks who are on H4 cannot work. Some people can, but some cannot work. So it's been really great. Some of our folks have been able to access the H-1B visa lottery while they're on there. So we have been able to change some people's status also. So it's a really great tool that a lot of folks in our community don't know about. And actually, even immigration lawyers don't know about it. So again, it's the I-765B. And if you think you might qualify, think you know someone who might need that help, I would recommend you reach out to Raksha, because we, through the South Asian Bar Association of Georgia and Raksha, have a pro bono program where I do a pro bono consultation, and then we connect with volunteer attorneys and I mentor them and help them to do the application. So if this is something that you think you need, or if you think that someone you know and care about needs, just make sure you give Raksha a call and they'll connect us.
Thank you so much. Well, now because we're on that topic, we did have a question from a viewer, or I should say someone earlier before the program even began, which is somewhat related. So I want to go ahead and address that at this time. The question had to do with if someone is on an H4 EAD, so that's a dependent visa of an H-1B who is an H-4, and we have someone who has the employment authorization documentation. If they're in that situation, and I don't think any type of abuse is mentioned in this scenario, what happens if they divorce?
So the difficult thing about immigration law is once you're divorced, if you're a dependent spouse, like an H-4 visa holder, some folks are on L2 visas, your status, you don't have status as of the date of the divorce because your status was tied to the marriage. So if you're in the process of divorcing, you definitely want to consult with an immigration attorney to look at your options before you end up in that situation. So of course, not everybody who's getting divorced is necessarily abused. But I would definitely talk to an attorney who knows about I-765Bs, because sometimes, again, people don't realize that the pattern of behavior that they've been experiencing might qualify. And if it doesn't, then the options might be to switch to a different status. A lot of folks switch to a student status or another work visa, the H-1B lottery. Some folks might be switching to visitor status even. So I think just assessing your options through a consultation with an attorney, hopefully before you get there. And if you get divorced but you weren't notified, if there was, I've seen many times that people have a divorce decree, but they weren't properly served or notified, and there was fraud in the process, then maybe that divorce needs to be challenged. So definitely in those situations, unfortunately, you're having to talk to two lawyers, a divorce attorney and an immigration lawyer. But if you get anything that's going on, then yeah, definitely do that.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to switch gears here and talk a little bit about priority dates. So for our viewers, I'm guessing many of our viewers already know about this, but still to keep it relevant for everyone, we have priority dates that come up if you have filed for a green card. And so I want to throw this question over to, well, actually, I'm going to mix this, not just priority dates, but I also want to talk about backlogs at the consulate. The reason I'm putting this together is our wait times are long. So I'm going to start with Jameel to talk about backlogs at the consulate and NVC. If you can first tell me a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about priority dates.
Sure. And again, thank you for having me on this panel. I'm really happy to be here talking with everybody. Now, for those that don't know what the NVC is, that's the National Visa Center. All right. So, here we are waiting for our interviews at the U.S. consulate. Oftentimes for immigrant visas, we have to deal with the National Visa Center first. All right. The National Visa Center is backed up, very backed up right now. When you submit documents to them, they're not going to look at it for about 2.5 months right now. When your case gets approved at USCIS, they're not even going to open the case at the National Visa Center for about 2 weeks. If you need to ask them questions, you're looking at about a 2-month wait. And unfortunately, they took away their hotline number. So before you could call, ask questions about what's going on with your case at the NVC. Then they started saying that they're just busy, call back later, and they can't accept your call. Now they're just not taking calls. So just keep in mind that they're just overwhelmed. Things are just, there's just the backlog. They're creating a bottleneck at the NVC. But once your case gets to a certain stage, usually it's called documentarily qualified, meaning you've got all the documents that the NVC needs for your immigrant visa. You then get in line and they'll notify the US embassy or consulate that will schedule your interview. So here, because of COVID, all these embassies around the world started shutting down, especially in South Asia. They shut down multiple times. The wait times right now, you're looking at easily a year in Islamabad. You're looking about a year easily in Mumbai. And you're looking at similar backlogs, 6 months plus, closer to a year in other parts of South Asia. So it's painful. It is a long time to be waiting. You're right there waiting just for your interview. But there are ways to kind of push it forward if you're looking at aging out, if there's urgent situation going on with your family, humanitarian crisis. There are ways to try to expedite it. So reach out to an attorney to talk about it. But if you're just waiting like everybody else and there's no urgent situation, you can expect about a year wait time easily from the time you get qualified at the NVC until you get scheduled for your interview. Now, the good news is we're getting lots and lots of interviews right now. I mean, they're just scheduling people in. They can't even get the biometrics done in time. So it's moving fast. They're just cramming as many people as they can at the embassy, shoulder to shoulder. So they're trying to clear through this backlog, but it's quite a backlog. The one thing I will say, for if you have any family members that are waiting for that interview date and they've already been qualified at the NVC, please make sure that you get your police clearance certificates updated. If it's close to about a year from the time that they got those certificates, go ahead and start applying for a new one. Sometimes they take weeks, sometimes they take months, depending on where you are in the region of your country. So go ahead and get those done ahead of time so that way you don't have any hiccups when it comes there.
That's really good advice. Yeah, because their wait times are so long with the 1 year time frame that people don't realize. They're just so excited to get that interview or whatever that they don't realize they have to update documents again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So just staying somewhat related to that, only because we have such long wait times, I want to come back to that priority date when we file for green card and we're waiting for our priority date to come up. What are we looking at in wait times? Does it feel like that things are taking longer? Do you have any updates on that for me, Nisha?
Yeah, so I think on the employment-based priority date, so with immigration and priority dates, basically we're talking about your place in line and the family-based, immigration or the employment-based. So in the employment-based, we have seen some improvement for folks who are born in India. It's still slow, but for us, relatively, it's moving a little bit faster. So right now, folks who filed their green card or started the green card process, probably in 2011, 2012, they're starting to get their green cards. And so that's great. But I think that, unfortunately, it's still a really long time. I think we thought it would be even longer than it is now. And I think the current administration is trying to find visa numbers from other categories and use them. So that's been helpful. And then I think that on the family-based side, the reason we talk about specific countries, I just wanted to back up, is that there's a quota, and then no more than 7% of the green cards can go to one particular country. And so where there's a heavy demand, there's like a longer backlog based on your country of birth. And so on the family-based side, if you're a spouse of a permanent resident, and the wait is not too bad. But for the other categories, it's still pretty slow. The common question I get is, I'm a citizen now, can I sponsor my brother or sister? That's going to take 10 to 15 years right now. It's a really long time. But you'll be surprised at how quickly that goes. So the one thing to be aware of is the kids. So folks age out of these employment and family-based cases. And so there is something called the Child Status Protection Act, but it doesn't cover everybody and involves a lot of math for us to calculate whether you qualify or not. And so just have to be aware of that. And so sometimes had a really sad situation recently where a client started his green card process with his employer when his daughter was 11. Yeah. And she aged out, and she now has to find her own way. And she will, because she's a brilliant lady. But it's really sad that, right. She was 11 when her dad started. It was actually on her 11th birthday, her party day. And she's aged out. And so we definitely need some change there. But right now, I think that's kind of the rough wait times that we're dealing with.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Now, some of our viewers here are also interested in hearing about asylum. They've heard about it perhaps on the news. They want to know, can they qualify? What would be the benefit of filing for asylum? What does it really mean? When am I allowed to file? I want to talk to you, Alpa, about that. Can you tell me a little bit more, if we have questions like this, what do we need to know about us filing for asylum?
Absolutely. And I should have mentioned asylum as a remedy in the beginning. It is also a form of humanitarian relief, but it's designed to help people who are fleeing their home country, people who have experienced some harm or have a well-founded fear of experiencing some harm in another country. It's the exact same definition as a refugee, and a lot of times people are familiar with that concept. The only difference is where the person is being processed. So if somebody is processed in a third country as a refugee, they're entering the United States and they have immigration status. If they are here in the United States and they say they're unable to go back, then they have to go through the asylum process, which is starkly different. And so there are several different avenues to getting asylum once here in the United States, and that also depends on whether you're asking for that help at the border, whether you are already here on lawful status or here undocumented. So there's typically, though, you should be applying for asylum within 1 year of your arrival in the United States. There are some limited exceptions to that, but generally speaking, most people will want to apply within that time frame. And when I say, asylum often is thrown around as kind of a catch-all remedy, but it's very specific. The eligibility for it requires you to prove certain elements, and that your well-founded fear of harm is based on a protected ground. And there are 5 protected grounds upon which you can seek asylum: your race, religion, your nationality, your political opinion, and your membership in a social group. And so those are, again, very specific and requires a lot of documentation. Your ability to apply for and receive asylum also depends on whether you're going the affirmative route, which means you're applying for asylum in front of an asylum officer. You put together an application, your I-589 form, all of your supporting evidence, you submit it, and you have an interview in front of an officer. If you apply for a defensive asylum, that means you're going to be in front of an immigration judge, and there will be a trial attorney who is arguing against your case. I think it's fairly common knowledge that in Georgia, we are home to one of the most difficult immigration courts in the nation when it comes to asylum. We, year after year, have some of the highest denial rates in the country. And that's unfortunate, because the person seeking asylum here in Georgia is in theory no different person seeking asylum in California, but those approval rates just vary and make it very difficult for someone to obtain relief. So it is a remedy. It is something that GAIN is currently working on quite a bit when it comes to global crises. Take the Afghan crisis, for example. We have over 2,000 Afghan refugees who are here in the United States and in Georgia in particular, and they've entered as parolees, and now they're all having to figure out a way to remain in the U.S. long term. And unfortunately, asylum is one of the few options that they have at their disposal. And that's complicated when we don't have enough attorneys in the state for each individual person, because asylum is a very difficult process to navigate. And as kind of Nisha was saying earlier, we do always recommend that you consult with a lawyer at the very least to understand what your options are, whether you qualify, and whether applying for asylum is the best course for you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, it's good to know that we have many different options. And I think you're right, it is drastically different than some of the others that were named before, but it might fit for someone who's watching today. The other one that I wanted to talk about is about TPS. Who here would like to field a question about TPS and what that involves? Okay, okay, Nisha, you win. Tell us about TPS and whether it's benefited South Asians, and what does it take to file? What is the eligibility requirement?
Yes, so TPS is temporary protected status, and it's when the administration determines that the conditions in a particular country are not safe to send somebody back to who's already here. And so typically there's requirements that you are physically present in the US, and that's for a certain date. And, there are several countries. The only South Asian country currently is Nepal. So there is TPS for Nepal. And but there's some folks who unfortunately just get excluded because of the date of entry. So the USCIS website actually has really good information about TPS and where, if you qualify, and they have it in different languages too. So you can take a look there. There's a lot of folks in the US who have had TPS for many, many years from other countries. And then there's new countries that are designated for TPS, and then sometimes those folks will transition and use employment options or asylum options. Venezuela is an example. There are a lot of folks in the US from Venezuela. So, but I guess I just would add one thing on the asylum is just to make sure you assess your risks for filing for asylum, because it can trigger deportation proceedings. That might be a good option for you still, but you want to have open for all the risks that you have, especially if you haven't met the 1-year deadline. And as Alpa mentioned, generalized conditions in a country would not necessarily qualify for your asylum. It just kind of depends on your particular circumstances. So TPS is sort of a different type of protection where it's just, right now we don't think it's safe. We need TPS for Ukraine. We need TPS for Venezuela. And then sometimes it continually gets renewed. And then sometimes the conditions change and it's not designated anymore. I think I like the USCIS website best to go there for questions. And then obviously you want to talk to an attorney. But I have seen some attorneys and folks pretending to be attorneys tell people to file for asylum, and it's created a huge mess in people's lives. So just be really careful and ask lots of questions and question what people tell you.
Yeah, that's good advice. Now I'm going to shift over to our audience. We have a few questions that have come up. The first question is about if a criminal case is pending against the abuser, and it is expected to take a long time, can I still file for a U visa, or do you have to wait until that case is disposed? So I'm going to talk to you about that, Jameel, because you have a good mix of both the criminal law aspect as well as immigration. So you might be able to help us with that.
Sure. So back to the basics again. So to qualify for a U visa, again, you have to get a supplement from the government showing that you've been helpful to them. So that can be local agencies, that can be police, the sheriff. It can also be the district attorney's office or other types of prosecutors. So the short answer is no, you do not have to wait for the case to be finalized before you can file for the U visa. You just have to show that you are participating, that you are actively helping in the prosecution, and you have to have that agency that's willing to certify it. So oftentimes, even if, the police officers or the higher up sergeants and stuff like that will certify it. Sometimes you'll get a nice, helpful district attorney. Usually it's a ADA or someone of that level that will help you certify it, and you can go ahead. You don't have to wait for the case to complete before you can get that certification and then start the process.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I could add just one
Yeah.
thing to that. There's been one occasion during my time at GAIN where what Jameel just mentioned, that certification really does determine whether someone can move forward with a U visa or not. And we did have one case where that certification was denied to us because while the case was pending, the abuser absconded. He had posted bail, left the country, and we went back to the prosecutor and asked if they would still sign the certification because our client had fulfilled her obligations. She was cooperating, had been from the very beginning, had provided all of the information they needed to move forward with prosecution, and it was at no fault to her that this person had left the United States. And the response we got back was that the certification couldn't be issued until the case was closed, and that the warrant that had been issued would be open indefinitely. And so we would have to wait indefinitely for a signed certification. That was a very hard thing to explain to our client because she didn't understand why that would be the case. And eventually we were, through some advocacy involving Raksha, I believe, we were able to get that certification signed. But I mentioned that only to say that the U visa certifications are discretionary. And depending on what county you're in, what agency within the county that you are working with, they may decide to sign or not, which then can determine whether you can move forward with your case.
Well, can I add something to that too? So the law says that, you're eligible if you were, are, or could be helpful to either the investigation or prosecution. So, just because a perpetrator hasn't been caught doesn't mean you can't request it and they can't sign it. Just because I've had cases where the police department wouldn't certify, but the district attorney's office would. A partner's mentioned in the chat, just a reminder that judges can sign, DFACs can sign. There's a lot of different agencies. So sometimes, depending on where you are, you can go to different places, but there's so much discretion. And sometimes when they say, no, our policy is X, you can educate on why this particular survivor deserves that protection. And sometimes it doesn't work, but sometimes it can. And so sometimes you have to be creative. And I find that, Aparna and I were talking earlier today about in Dunwoody, we're having a challenge. And so we're going to try to go down and talk to them about, a particular group of folks are going to be excluded for relief if they only sign when there's a case that's active or that is actively being prosecuted even. But there is a U visa law enforcement certification guide. So if you're wondering, you can look at that too. And there's wonderful private attorneys who can help you, nonprofits that can help you. And a lot of the folks who do the work a lot will have the relationships or know. But I call Raksha all the time when I'm getting stuck because Aparna and others at Raksha have a relationship, or they might be able to ask a question, or they might tell me to speak to a specific advocate. So just know that you want to be creative and try everything, but it can be hard if the agency isn't helping.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. No, it's good to get that experience from all three of you, because it does reiterate the fact that some agencies that just have a flat policy that they won't sign, but that there are various officers of the law that you could possibly go to get that signature. So that's good. Now, a little bit on the flip side, what if the individual who is seeking the immigration benefit finds themselves in a tough spot where they have been arrested for something? how bad is that situation? What if it's a minor offense? What if it's a, second degree misdemeanor? Does all of this matter? Does it matter how many crimes? I want to talk to Jameel about that. Can you tell me how this might affect my immigration status, depending on whether I'm on a visa, green card? Can you talk to me about that?
Sure. So it varies. I hate to give you the lawyer answer. It really does depend on a number of factors. So the type of visa that you're looking for, there's certain issues of inadmissibility that's going to come up with different types of visas. Certainly like a U visa, they're a little more forgiving. In a U visa setting, you can get away with more than you can if you're applying for like a family-based green card, for example. And keep in mind, for a lot of they're going to be looking at the totality of circumstances. A lot of it, like Alpa was mentioning, is discretionary on the certification end. It's also discretionary on USCIS side as well, on whether or not they look at it. So they're going to look at how bad the crime is in a U visa. They're going to look about the suffer, the harm. They're going to look at your good moral character. They're going to look at what type of stuff you've done in the past. So that's a really difficult question to answer because it really depends. Mm-hmm. I've seen cases where they are very strict and they're very harsh, and little minor infractions are being denied. I've seen cases where it's almost like a Hail Mary, and you're just like, and they just gets through on the first go, and they don't even ask for dispositions on it. So it really depends on the officer, each case. But just keep in mind that, especially when you're looking for certain things, they're going to be looking at, again, the totality of circumstances. And again, in that family settings, for the most part, you're going to have to be pretty squeaky clean to make it all the way to citizenship.
Right. And that actually brings me to something related to that. Not necessarily just a pitch for you because you do both, but it is very rare to find someone who practices in what we like to call crimmigration. But it is important if you find yourself in that situation, because oftentimes, I think all of you will agree that we find individuals who just plead to something to make it go away quickly. And then it can cause so many problems for them in the future. So they need someone who does know immigration and not just criminal law. Would you all agree with that?
Yeah, I was actually going to mention the same thing, Lalitha. So the first thing you need to know is that if you get arrested for anything, you need to see a crimmigration attorney. Jameel, there's other folks. There's only a handful of folks locally, actually, who know how to do this properly. And I think there's a question in the chat about, are there some crimes that are waivers for? Immigration is so strange and counterintuitive in this area. So you can have a misdemeanor for which you have served 0 time in jail. Yeah. That is an aggravated felony under the immigration law and will subject you to mandatory detention and almost no relief. And it might be something as simple as a box not being checked on your disposition. And so you must. We see this, the mess we clean up is usually because somebody didn't immediately talk to a crimmigration expert. And the other thing you have to be really careful about is that's forever. So if you think that you've got something expunged, if someone said it's not on your record, it's on the immigration record forever. So don't answer that you've not been arrested on your green card application if you've been arrested. And you better not even fill out that application until you've talked to an attorney who understands inadmissibility issues that Jameel was talking about and removability issues, because the regular garden variety, employment immigration attorney, they don't know these things. So you have to tell them. Don't hide it, because there's some times where somebody, if they had just said that they were arrested and explained what happened and given the paperwork, they would have been fine. But if they hide and double down on hiding it, then you're dealing with fraud denial. So you don't file anything, you don't do anything until you talk to a good attorney. And if something they're telling you doesn't sound right, get a second opinion. Yeah. And there's so many people who, find themselves in hot water because of that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And to piggyback on that, it's painful when you meet with somebody that took a deal they thought was good and they didn't consult with an immigration attorney. Exactly what Nisha was saying. Whether it's expunged or it's going to be sealed, you plead nolo, and it's not a big deal. please just double check. A lot of times your normal criminal defense attorney is doing their best job. They're trying to get you a deal that's, least amount of fines or least amount of jail time, when someone like myself or an immigration attorney is going to be looking at it completely different. How is this going to affect your ability to stay in the United States and not affect your immigration status? So again, if you know anyone that's not a citizen that has any type of crime or pending crime, please encourage them to speak to an immigration attorney.
And Aparna put in the chat, are there crimes, other waivers? So there are, if you're in that situation, you need to talk to the immigration attorney, but also the immigration attorney, because if it is an issue, and it might not be, but if it is an issue, it may be that you qualify for a waiver, and that's going to depend on a lot of different things because there's a lot of different type of waivers. If you are a survivor of domestic violence or another crime, the waivers are very generous and they protect you. And I see so many times that my clients who are abused actually get arrested because sometimes the police will arrest both parties, or sometimes there'll be a language barrier and the person who spoke English gave their version of the events and they got arrested when they might have been defending themselves, for example. So just know that if you are a survivor of domestic violence, there are very generous provisions. But the earlier that you talk to someone, the better. So if you go talk to Jameel, maybe you don't even need the waiver. But it's the theme is probably talk to an attorney, talk to an attorney, talk to an attorney. Just a consultation is really very, very important.
Very good. Yeah. And on that context, do you want to remark on that, Alpa? I think you might have something to say about VAWA here, right?
Sure. Well, just something to underscore that both Nisha and Jameel have talked about. I mean, the importance of talking to a lawyer, whether or not you retain them, but somebody who can guide you is so important. But it's also really important if you have multiple attorneys, somebody who is your immigration attorney, somebody who's helping in your family law case, somebody in your criminal. It's so incredibly helpful for everyone to talk and to be in contact from the beginning, because there's so much intersection between abuse and family law and criminal law. And there are issues that we can catch early on and strategize about that can improve the overall outcome. And just to add about the VAWA self-petition, again, not all is lost. If you have a criminal record, or if there is something that may show up negatively in terms of your good moral character, there may be a way for you to still move forward on your case. What might happen in the VAWA context is that, because again, the VAWA is just the step one in trying to become a green card holder and get permanent residence. So you may, depending on the situation, may not be able to move past the VAWA portion. You may be hindered from applying for your green card, but that doesn't mean that you can't still have an approved VAWA, be considered in deferred action, which means low priority for deportation. All of that is very detailed, but again, just to say that not all is lost. We encourage you to come forward and ask for help. We know how hard this is to come forward in the first place, and having a criminal record should not prevent you from speaking to someone about your options.
And we've heard everything. So it's like talking to your doctor. We've seen everything. We've heard everything. We will not we're not allowed to tell anybody. They will take our law license if we tell others in the community about your situation. So we can really help you better if we know what's going on. And we can help you get the documents if you don't have them.
Okay, so I'm going to turn to another question that we received before we began today. It's a little bit specific in nature, but it deals with U1 visas, but also F1 OPT. So I'm going to direct this at you, Nisha, if you don't mind.
Yes. So I actually talked to Aparna offline about this, and we're going to have a phone conversation.
Separately then?
Well, no, I'm just mentioning that, but I will just mention this is a great example of the intersection, because the question involves U visas, which are survivor relief, and then the employment, not really employment, but the F1 international student and the employment authorization. And the reason that I would like to have a conversation is that if you file for an F1 or an H1B or employment visa or extend your visitor status, there's a whole lot of questions on the application. And it's really important that you, again, speak to an attorney who knows your entire immigration history so that they can make sure that you're not doing anything inconsistent, that you're not triggering a problem. For example, and it's not on the OPT situation, but I've seen a lot of people run into trouble when they file extension applications or change of status applications because they didn't answer a question correctly regarding have they worked or not. And sometimes I wish that person had not filed that application because I'm now running into an issue where, you know, they've given incorrect information. And so it might derail their other case where if they had just not filed anything, we would have been okay. So all of this is to say immigration, whenever you file anything with immigration, if you're having a subsequent application, as Alpa mentioned, there's, you know, a conference call with the folks involved is really, really important. But just making sure that someone knows your entire immigration history and then can walk through whether that's a good idea for you or not, and if there are risks, and there may not be in this situation at all. But I would just want to ask about 10 questions about the situation, so I feel comfortable saying, yes, that's the right thing for you. And the other thing that gets to be tricky is travel. So, you know, with the U visas, there's these really important travel restrictions, but some people who get a student visa might think, oh, I can travel now. And then there's just these competing issues. So just contacting an attorney who has knowledge about both is good.
Okay, great. Thank you. We do have someone who is in the middle of writing their question, so I'm probably going to circle back to that. But while we're waiting for that, as attorneys who have been practicing for a while, what are some things that you wish your clients knew? What do you wish that, you know, they knew before they came to you, or you want them to know before they start on a case? I'll start with Alpa.
You know, I think that this day and age, there's a lot of information available at our fingertips. I can't tell you how many times I've met with somebody for a consultation and they know exactly the course they want to follow. They've read online about what eligibility requirements there are and what documents they have to submit. And on the one hand, I think that's wonderful. We should all be informed about what our rights and remedies are. But I do think that sometimes having an open mind, being honest and transparent with your attorney who you're doing the consultation with, and allowing them to gather the facts and present their legal opinion to you is very important before moving forward. Because I think that there are, as Nisha said, there are certain facts that can alter the advice. It might warrant going in one direction over the other, and sometimes all of that is not. You know, you won't be able to know that just by looking at some blog or some information that you find online. So a lot of this work in immigration in particular is constantly evolving, and there's policy changes and case law and things that, again, you won't find readily available as a layperson. So it is just really important to trust your advocate, your attorney, and if you don't, then find somebody that you do.
You know, I'm glad you said that, because I often like to make analogies to the medical profession, because I think many of us tend to understand that. And I would say, you know, it's good if we come in knowing what cancer is, we know what benign means and certain terminology, but at the end of the day, we don't want to be diagnosing things on our own and coming up with remedies that may not work for us, that we leave to the professionals. So I find that it's similar. It's good for them to know certain things and come in knowing about it, but let the professionals help you with the right path. I think that's really the story behind that, right? Yeah. Jameel, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Sure. So piggyback on Alpa, sign up for a consultation with an attorney, someone, if you can't afford it, find an organization. There's little things that you might not think of that can make you ineligible or that can really throw a wrench into your case. So even if you don't plan on having an attorney through the whole process, at least just discuss eligibility with them so that way they can go through it and red flag anything that doesn't sit well with them or concerns them. Again, I do a good amount of immigration, so for my basis, it breaks my heart when people come to me and they've gotten that green card or they've gotten that temporary situation fixed, but they haven't made it to the citizenship at the end. So please, if you are eligible to become a citizen, please do not stop. Do not just relax once you get to some kind of temporary status. Please continue pushing, because that might be the difference between, being able to not be deported one day or your child. I have lots of individuals here where they're saved because mom and dad became a citizen when they were a kid and they had no idea that they became a citizen.
Mm-hmm.
So for that reason, it can make a world of difference. So just continue on. And then lastly, just to harp on what we talked about earlier, NOLO, pleading, before you plead to anything, speak to an attorney because it might have more implications than you know.
Okay. Nisha?
Yeah, the same line of thought is the consultation is really, really important. A lot of times you might have a straightforward citizenship case, but still do the consultation, even if you're going to do it on your own, because your situation isn't like other people's, and what you read online, as Alpa mentioned, may not apply to you. And the heartbreak cases that Jameel was talking about is when somebody just thought what made sense was probably what immigration would do. That's not the case. So have a consultation, and then, the attorney that you consult with should be able to explain the why and the how of things. And if you don't feel comfortable, get a second opinion. Also, if an attorney tells you you should not file something, that you should heed that warning and then get a second opinion if you want to, because I've seen folks who got in trouble, got into hot water they didn't need to get into, or the case wasn't properly filed. And so that's something that I've seen where I wish they had talked to me before.
Yeah. No, that's good advice. Since you're talking about getting the consultation and how important it is, our viewers want to know, what if they need a low bono consultation or a pro bono consultation? What are some of the organizations in our community that might be able to assist with that? Alpa, do you want to help with that?
I think I know one. The immigration nonprofit community is fairly small here in Georgia. But one of the benefits, and particularly when you're talking about survivors and the remedies available to them, is that we do a great deal of outreach and partnership building with shelters, domestic violence organizations, social service agencies. And so we try to make sure that every one of our organizations knows how to connect you with an agency that does this work. GAIN, for example, is one of those organizations. There's also the Center for CPACs. There is Kids in Need of Defense, Latin American Association. There are a number of organizations that do this work. And the beauty of it also is that because we work so closely together, we know what's in our wheelhouse and what would serve you better to go somewhere else. And so I encourage you to reach out to any of the agencies that I mentioned. I suspect we could also provide you with a list of organizations after today's call if you are interested. But we like to believe that anywhere you go, you will be then referred or connected to somebody else who can help you if they can.
And if you're an H4 survivor, reach out to Raksha and they can coordinate a pro bono consultation with me. And if you're not sure if that's what you need, reach out to Raksha and we will connect on it. And then, a lot of times I put my email in here. Just email me. I can, if the organizations, if you're running into something that's the intersection of a lot of issues, and contact me. I can try to do my best to guide you. And I have a pro bono and low bono. If Raksha lets me know someone doesn't have access to resources, I can try to do a phone consultation or guide you in some way. I can't give legal advice through email, but sometimes the question is general. So I can try. My response time right now is not great, but I will try to get you the help that you need. And the other thing I would mention is the consultations. If you do have access to resources, if you are working, consultations are usually $100 to $300 at most law firms. So again, it doesn't require that you sign a retainer or do anything like that. And that's why it's really, really important to try to do that. And I think a lot of times people send general emails, but there's a lot of relevant information missing. So going to definitely contact the organizations if you can, and then reach out to me. Locally, I know folks who might be able to help, and Aparna's put some organizations here as well. And I forget sometimes which ones have the strengths in different areas. So I think the different organizations, as Alpa mentioned, they can usually point you in the right direction. But if you're getting spun around all of them and nobody does the intersection, I might be a good resource for you.
Well, and also to tie back, since our event is jointly with Raksha, we do have one or two people from California asking if Raksha is able to assist with immigration matters from around the United States, or is it more based in Georgia? Would you be able to answer that again, Nisha?
So I actually responded to someone's question directly to me in the chat, and I mentioned that if your local nonprofits don't know about the I-765V, for example, if you reach out to me and let me know the organizations, I can try to share my templates and information with them. And I've done that before. There was somebody in DC who needed assistance, and I had a colleague there, and I reached out to them and said, here, you can have all my templates and you can call me about this. But so I think, unfortunately, again, the I-765V, people don't know a lot about it. And so I'm happy to try to answer emails.
You'll be able to help those organizations.
I can, usually it's easier if I help the organization. Because I can share the resources that I have. Because when we created the project with Raksha and the Asian Bar Association, we created a lot of resources. So I think it would be helpful to do it that way.
Excellent. Okay.
I'll put my email in the chat again, just in case.
Jameel?
I'd like to add in, if the person is detained, or they're at a detention center, there's also organizations like Southeast Immigrant Freedom Initiative, SPLC, El Refugio. They'll, a lot of private attorneys will take cases through them. So they'll kind of be the vetters and then try to place it with individuals. And then also don't be shy to ask private attorneys and firms. Like, they might not have it on their website, but if you say, hey, I'm a victim of violence or this and that,
Right.
do you guys offer any low bono or pro bono cases? Or at least a consult. A lot of times they will work with you. So just ask around.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I think we've had a lot of information today, and especially if immigration is not an issue you're facing, it probably just made their mind spin. But I think you've helped a lot of our viewers, because they did have immigration concerns, as we can see from the chat. And I'm really glad that we were able to come together. And I want to thank each and every one of you, because you've been instrumental in providing advice on different areas of immigration. I think, some people may think immigration is just one subject, but even within that, we've talked about removal and employment-based and family-based cases. And I appreciate each of you bringing your expertise here today. So with that, I'd like to conclude, but if anyone has any further questions, they can reach out to, I will put in the box for SABA, Georgia. If you have any further questions, you can email us. Oh, I private chatted that, sorry, to this email address. And I'll be happy to share it with Raksha or any of our panelists. If you have someone specific you want to direct a question to, if you have a more specific question. But with that, I'm going to conclude, and I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Have a great night.